Councilman David Kloiber, as always, it's good to chat with you, and thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to come and talk with me about some issues very important to folks in these last weeks running up to the election. So I want to start with a very general overarching question, which is, why do you want this job? I mean, you've been going out to campaign now for several months, so I know it's already what your laser focus is, but let's take us back a little bit. Why do you want this job?
So I brought my family back here because I wanted my kids to grow up in the same city I grew up in. And so the more involved that I've become in how our city is addressing issues and how it's being run, I've seen that a lot of these issues just aren't being addressed. These issues around the affordable housing and around the crime, they've grown up out of many, many years. And so I'm running for this position because we need someone at that highest level who's going to steer the ship back towards addressing these issues so that the city my kids get to grow up in is like the city I got to grow up in.
So we'll go ahead and jump right into what's been perhaps the most conversational issue of this entire campaign, which has been crime. And I know you and I, in fact, just recently got to talk about this exact issue. You've been very critical of your opponent's approach to solving crime in the city. You've proposed an alternative program. We can get into the details of that if you'd like. But talk to me a bit about the criticisms that you see with how our current approach is, and what problems you see with the approach Mayor Gordon would rather take to community policing versus what you're proposing.
I think the first thing to note is that the mayor hasn't been willing to admit there's a problem until only very, very recently. All the way through May, through July, through August, and even as recent as some of our debates, the mayor has said violent crime is down in our city. We're already addressing it. And when you go out and talk to members of the community, that's not what they're feeling. When you look at the fact that we've had 3 years in a row where we've set new homicide records, it doesn't match up. So when we talk about the policies that have gone forward, the first thing you have to do is admit there's a problem. And that would be my biggest criticism, is that it has taken so long and so many months of not just me, but many members in the community trying to get the administration and the mayor to admit that there's this problem before they'll even come out with an idea, of course, just a couple of weeks before the election. So that's the first kind of big thing. If we want to talk about the plans that she has put out there, I believe that they're rushed. I believe that there are some good things in those plans, but she's also trying to recreate the wheel. She's looking to make something new for Lexington instead of using the hard-won knowledge that cities all over the country have come to over the last 30 years of community policing. So her programs take a lot of pieces that I would also use. There is a lot of overlap. The issue is she doesn't have an integration of getting our officers out into our neighborhoods, walking through neighborhoods, working with the community in order to address these issues.
When it comes to public safety, how would you solve some of the issues that we're seeing, not just here in Lexington, but several cities are experiencing officer shortages? What do you see as the root problem when it comes to why that issue is existing, and how do you solve it?
So if you want to make sure you have a robust and vibrant employee base, you need to be able to recruit from anywhere, from the best markets, to make sure that you can have the best people working for you. We don't have what's called laterals here in Fayette County. That is, an officer from another department, no matter how many years they've served there or what their exemplary track record is, they have to come back and go through basically the basic training in order to be an officer here in Fayette County, instead of being able to come over at their same kind of level. That really makes it hard for us to get a lot of highly skilled individuals. we often hear about how our police officers, our highly trained officers, are going to other places, Louisville, Jasmine County, the Kentucky State Police. It's because those places are allowing for these laterals to happen. So the very first thing we have to do is get a system that allows us to pull from those markets. Additionally, we need to make sure we have things in place that once someone's here, they're incentivized to stay here. You've probably heard of a 36-month buyback on a nurse's contract. You go to school, you become a registered nurse, and then if you want to go to a different employer, they have to buy out that contract because there's a cost associated with training you. Well, we don't have that here. And again, I said we train our officers very highly, but we don't have any kind of buyback. No one compensates us for all of that training if they go to another district. So really, it's a combination of things. We need to be intentional. We need to be able to draw from as many different communities as we can to get highly skilled individuals. We need to make sure we incentivize them to stay here in the environment that we're building.
Now, staying on the issue of crime and public safety, in terms of Lexington's statistics, the mayor has often pointed to how many of these have been domestic violence type crimes, and there wasn't much that could have been done to prevent them from occurring. I'm interested, is there any particular program or services out there that you were considering or thought of that would help us tackle those types of crimes?
So first, let's get away from this mentality that it's okay to say there's a type of homicide that we can't address. We need to use different strategies, but you can address these things. When we're talking about domestic violence, one of the programs I've presented is called IPVI. It's Intimate Partner Violence Intervention. It gets in the middle of these domestic violence related incidents and tries to bring services to people to get them out of those situations before we get to homicide. Because it's not often that the first time the police are called to a domestic violence case is for a homicide. It's often something that has been happening for a period of time. We need to be able to get resources to meet people where they are instead of expecting them to be able to break that cycle themselves and come and find us. So the program that I'm presenting for that is this IPVI. But it doesn't matter what the issue is, whether it's just domestic violence, whether it's disputes that are going on in schools, whether it's drug related, whether it's dealing with different groups or gangs. We have to break this mentality that there are things we cannot address and understand that the underlying issues that cause this are things that as a community and a society, we absolutely can. And so in my administration, I will focus on using those statistics not to try and say these things couldn't have been prevented, but to say this is where our resources should go. Because we're talking about real human life, not just a number on a page.
What do you say whenever someone asks you if Lexington is safe?
I tell them that Lexington is on a path right now and that we're seeing a trend, but we can't say that it is safe or unsafe. I'll say it's getting less safe the longer we go not addressing these problems. But that's kind of like saying, is someone good or bad? People are complex. A city is complex. And yes, we're having an uptick in these issues. But tomorrow, or more notably in a couple of weeks, we can make a decision to go a different direction and address these problems so that we don't see this continuing. So I would probably say it's complex, just like people, but we can do better.
Let's move on to another topic, and that being how we keep Lexington affordable. Affordable housing has been a big part of this race as well. I'm sure you're aware there was a group that protested pretty recently when it came to having a tenant's bill of rights. I'm hearing stories of landlords and property management groups buying up large sections of lower income residential area housing and then raising rents and not allowing Section 8 folks to live there. So what are your thoughts on those issues? Would you support any type of anti-discriminatory policy or statute?
So Louisville passed an anti-discriminatory ordinance that said we're going to extend the Fair Housing Act to include things like we shouldn't be discriminating where your money comes from, whether it's federal dollars through Section 8 or whether it's through alimony or child support. That shouldn't be the purview of the landlord so long as they're getting their rent, which they get to set those rates for. Now, I strongly support doing something similar here in Lexington. It will make it so that more people are able to get into more homes. But the issue that's underlying all of this is that we don't have enough available homes. We've seen one of the largest year-over-year increases in rental costs right here in Lexington for the entire country. The reason is because we have an artificially small market of homes being built. We could talk about all of the forces that go into that, but the government's role in it is to try and incentivize more housing development. That can be infill, that can be expansion. It doesn't matter where it is or what it is, just that we know that it's a need of the people in our community, and we need to incentivize those kind of developments.
In terms of still staying on this topic of affordability, you mentioned renters as well, but you also have a number of people who are homeowners and they pay taxes in the city, income taxes, property taxes, those types of things. Would you support any type of increase when it comes to the tax base or taxing?
Am I seeking to increase the tax base for the city? I think that the easiest way to describe that is this. I firmly believe that if you tell somebody exactly what it is you want to use those taxes for, they're much more willing to participate. If I told you specifically, if you paid me $1 on your property tax, I'll collect your garbage, I think we all make that agreement and that deal. It's really hard to do that when you try and say, I just want to collect more money and it could be used towards anything. Because then we all get into the discussion of, well, I'm not using that. Why would I want you to spend my money on that? So what I have wanted to do is ask the public. Go out and say, hey, are you interested in assessing 5 extra cents on your property tax in order to make sure that we have more housing in our city? Personally, I'm willing to make that deal. But I'm also not going to sit up there like I'm the king of Lexington and make that decision for everyone. I think it's important that if we're talking about this, about how we are spending money, how we are raising money, that we have a real candid conversation with the public and let them have their input.
Now, I know I'm speaking very generally here, because you often hear of many folks that live on the outside of Lexington, whether it be Georgetown, Versailles, wherever, that work in the city, that feel like it's not an affordable place to live. Taxes may have something to do with that, but certainly there's other factors at play there. At the end of the day, how can you just make it a more affordable place to live, work, enjoy yourself?
So you hit on something right there. Over 50% of the people who work in this city do not live in Lexington. And it's not because they wouldn't want to. Most people would like to live a few minutes away from where they work, or someplace they could walk or bike to work. But that's not possible because we are becoming less and less affordable every day. How do you address it? Well, you have to address it on all fronts. One, we need to make sure that houses are costing less, that rent is costing less, and that means we need more homes. More homes for people to rent long-term, more homes for people to buy, more places for people to live. We also need to attract more businesses, because one of the undercurrents in all of this discussion is, if the jobs we had were paying even more, it would be much easier to be affordable here in Lexington. But that doesn't happen unless you bring in more competitive, good-paying jobs. And we've seen that kind of drop off here in the last few years. So if I'm saying, how do we address this? We got to address more houses. We got to get better paying jobs, have more competition for jobs. And then that third part I kind of touched on is that transportation part. We need to make it so that people can move freely throughout the community without having to rely solely on an automobile.
You did not support the mayor's budget that you proposed this year. I'm not sure what the other stances were on the council, so I'm not sure if there were others that may have shared your stance, but can you talk to me a bit about what issues you saw with the budget and what you would have done differently?
So one of the first things that I did when I got on council was I tried to address this issue we keep seeing in the budget of it being unsustainable. Every year we're having an increased cost of about 8%, while our revenues are only growing 3 or 4%, even in the best of times. This keeps making a bigger and bigger gap. And how are we dealing with it? Well, we're borrowing. We're borrowing to pave our streets. We're borrowing to make sure that we have police cars and fire trucks. We need to make sure that these fundamental services we have fit within the revenues that we're collecting. And it's going to take a lot of reconfiguring on how we're spending our dollars to get there. So when I saw this most recent budget, which used every available dollar towards new programs that would have ongoing costs for more infrastructure projects without having, the maintenance associated with it, again, increased recurring costs. I saw that this budget was primed to balloon us even more in our costs than that normal 8%. And that's something we just cannot continue to do at a time when we have inflationary issues and we have recession fears. We can't just continue to spend and spend and spend and say we're going to get that money from borrowing from the future. So fundamentally, the way that the mayor has proposed a budget is unsustainable. It will lead to tax increases in the very near future. But there was not a whole lot that the council could do to change the whole thing. I don't know if you know this, the council only gets a month and a half in order to try and evaluate and fix a budget that the mayor proposed. We only have a couple of staff members total. We have one individually and then the core staff, whereas the mayor has the entire city staff and months and months and months to propose something and set the table. When it's set too poorly, sometimes all you can do is shift around a dish here or there. We couldn't do enough. And I commend my colleagues for doing as much as they did. But at the end of the day, I voted against it to raise awareness and to show people this is unsustainable. We are going to continue to have unsustainable budgets so long as the mayor is the one setting out the proposed budget in the first place.
How would you rate how our city has responded to homelessness?
Well, I would say this. We've raised enough awareness and we are taking steps to address it. We have seen an increase in the amount of people who are street involved and homeless and people who are seeking transitional housing. Can we do more? Yes. What should we do? Well, first we've got to organize. First we need to get all of the community partners that are currently giving services to those who are street involved and homeless and get them all coordinated in one place. We can't be reproducing these things over and over again. It costs too much, it's inefficient. If we want to address this issue, we need to make sure there's organization across the board as we have it, a continuum of care. And we need to make sure that we are allocating our resources to address this problem. There's one thing that is said about homelessness resources, and that's your needs will always outstrip your capacity. Because the more you do, the more you have yet to do. And I think that if we're talking about addressing this issue on our streets and in our communities here in Lexington, there's still a lot more that we need to do.
So I want to ask a few more generalized questions as we wrap up. I want to ask about your political affiliation. This is a nonpartisan race, so party politics really doesn't come into play here. But publicly, and correct me if I'm wrong, you've identified yourself as a Democrat. So I'm curious how, if at all, does your party affiliation may impact some of your decision making as mayor?
So the first thing to understand is nonpartisan doesn't mean non-principled. All of us take into office the beliefs that we have and the issues that we care about. And just because the parties themselves aren't involved in the election process doesn't mean that those same issues and those same principles aren't important to know about. Yes, I identify as a Democrat. I am very socially liberal and fiscally conservative. I think we need to have money management that is responsible, but I also believe very strongly in protecting the rights of all of our residents so they can live their best lives. That means when issues like abortion, which is a very partisan issue, come to the forefront, I spoke openly about it to say we need to protect these rights of our residents. Yes, it is a nonpartisan race, but you still need to know the principles of the people that you're electing into that office.
You brought up abortion. I know Amendment 2 deals with that, and I believe, I can't remember which outlet it was, you said that that was something you would not enforce if it were to pass. How could you go about doing that?
So yes, you mentioned Amendment 2, and I've spoken out very strongly to say we should vote no on Amendment 2. As far as not enforcing a ban, very fundamentally, the mayor has the ability to instruct and choose a police chief. Now, I hope that I can work with our current police chief in order to implement all of these plans that I want to do. But if he felt so inclined to enforce an abortion ban, I would remove him from office and find a new police chief who wouldn't. It's very simple. It's very concrete. The mayor has the ability to make sure whether or not abortion is enforced. These abortion bans are enforced here in Lexington, and as mayor, I will not allow that to happen.
Now, during the primary, we got a glimpse of what the city's thoughts were heading into this race, and your opponent got a lot of support during the primary. For any politician, regardless of how well-renowned they are, the gap that you're looking at to close is quite daunting. How do you feel about that?
So the goal in the primary is to get through the primary, which is what we did. As far as the gap or the perceived gap from the primary, people didn't know me before the primary. All we've done in the campaign is get out there and shine a light on who I am and who she is. I think you're going to find that in this upcoming election, those numbers aren't going to mean a whole lot because people have had time to learn who it was that was in office, what she has done and what she has failed to do, and what I stand for and what I plan to do as mayor. So coming up here in November, I think that anybody who's holding on to those old numbers is going to be in for a bit of a turn.
Councilman Kloiber, as we wrap up here, I just want to ask if there's any closing thoughts you want to touch on or any issues that you wanted to speak on that we didn't have the chance to touch here today.
Well, thank you for that. I think just generally, all of our issues are connected. Whether it's the crime, the homelessness, the affordable housing, the jobs, transportation, they're all connected. And it all comes back to how we move ourselves forward. I've presented a detailed plan, what my vision is, and how we as a community can work together to make it happen. I believe that we've seen what happens when you don't have that kind of a vision and a plan, and we've seen what happens when at the last second a whole bunch of things are kind of thrown out there. I've been saying the same thing since I started, which is we need to work as a community, we need to address these problems, and I'm ready to step up and do it.
Councilman David Kloiber, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.